Hey, my friends, how are we today? So, on today's podcast, I have Ryan Derousseau with United Financial Planning, and he is a certified financial planner. And we are going to talk about his story, how he got into financial planning, and we're going to talk about, I think we share a lot of similar um, beliefs or values. He's going to talk a little bit. I always call it like, uplifting the veil, behind your laptop, and like, what do you see on your end, which is very similar to what I see about how, um, clients, we haven't received schooling. Like, how are we expected to know what we don't know? We don't always have to be optimizing our cash and coming from that pressured place. And also about your different views, which I love, about in a way self-insured and like having fun versus emergency fund, and maybe we don't need all the protection that we think we might, or just a different way to think about it. So I want to first welcome you. Thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge with us, and let's dive in.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. Love talking about these types of topics. Talk about them all the time, frankly.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So let's dive in. Let's talk about just a little bit about your journey, how you got into financial planning, and then who are your clients that you help to love and love to support and help.
Yeah. So like probably all of us, very roundabout sort of way in. But I actually out of school was a journalist, and I worked in journalism for about probably about 10 years. And it just so happened that after school, I kind of found myself working for publications like Fortune and Money, where I was delving into investments, personal finance, those sort of topics. And in fact, one of my first like quote unquote sort of focuses was like financial planners. So
Mm.
like the people that
Hmm.
I am today, but I was actually covering them, and so I kind of learned one the tricks that not so above the board financial planners use, but also sort of the best ways to go about developing this business. Sort of like what do clients actually gain from this stuff, that sort of thing. And so a few years ago, wanted to make the switch, wanted to work with one on one with people. Meanwhile, the almost the entire time I was writing, I was self-employed. And so
Mm.
I was learning all about what's good, what's bad about self-employment. And so when I made this shift, I wanted to work with those who work for themselves, and a group that I happened to really connect with and needed that guidance were private practice therapists. And
Hmm.
so, I always consider myself, I work with anyone, but I really like working with the self-employed, and then have a particular expertise in the private practice space now.
Yeah, I love that. So, in terms of, because I think when, I always talk to my guests before we actually hit record
Mhm.
and have a podcast, and you and I shared, you shared with me offline, like the the sentiment that your clients, like I think it's across the board, right? Like your clients are saying this, my clients say this, and it's this idea of like we should be further along, or I should know this. And I would love it if kind of your take on that, and share kind of how guide and talk to your clients about that.
Yeah, so there's always this idea, like we talk with our friends and whatnot, and it's like we think that everyone else is just so far ahead of where we
Yeah.
are and whatnot. And in reality, is we are not taught any of this stuff. Like I happened to learn this stuff because I happened to cover investments right out of school. Like if I hadn't done that, I probably would just be at the same spot as a lot of listeners and clients and whatnot. And so to say that like there's been some sort of fault of yours to
Mm.
not have learned this is really, it's more of a societal fault. It's not a like a personal fault. And so one, I like to point that out to people just to be aware of like, yeah, you were not equipped with like
Yeah.
the tactics and tools. So one, you shouldn't like internalize that. And then two, despite all of that, you have probably created gains for yourself in some ways that you are not even considering. People who may be kind of deep into debt but have incredible amount of education and knowledge. Well, they have that incredible education and knowledge, and now maybe it is sort of utilizing that in some way. But when you're looking back, you see a lot of gains. I talk to folks who may be in their like early 60s and have say $1 million to their name, and they look back and they say, "Gosh, why didn't I do this? Or why didn't I do that? I could have so much more."
Mm,
And meanwhile, they're ignoring the fact that they have $1 million to
yeah.
their name. And so, how do we like work with that? And yeah, we all have goals. We all have things that we want to achieve in life. And big part of financial planning in general is understanding those goals and trying to help you get there. But let's not short thrift ourselves. You know, like
Yeah.
we have done a lot in our lives and
Yeah.
take pride in that.
Yeah. I think that that brings up, you didn't say the words, right? But like the shame and the guilt, like
Mhm,
I, financial planning, I went to school for financial planning, but like, besides that, like in college, right? Like, because those were required courses to sit for the CFP, right? Like that's not a thing that we're not really doing in high school. We're not teaching that kind of stuff. We're not teaching it as a just a general, like, how you have your undergrad stuff, or what do you call, like, your basic classes that you have to take, like your history and your
mhm.
maths and all that. Like there's none of that that is a requirement. And if you don't grow up in a house where, I mean, a lot of people that like money was kind of a squirrely thing for, like emotionally, right? Like if you don't grow up in a house where your parents either talk about money from a very safe and neutral place, and they want you to learn some basic things, right? Like we don't get that. That's kind of where it starts. And if it doesn't start there and we don't get it in school, then like where are we supposed to get it? And I think that, the shame, those feelings of shame and guilt that we have around not, and I'm air quoting for those of you listening, for not knowing, keeps us more of not knowing, right? Like we don't ask for help, we don't ask questions because we feel silly, and I'm air quoting, right? Like silly
Yeah.
or stupid. Like we have so many stories around why we should know this already, versus dropping the stories and being like, okay, this is where I'm at. And also, here's the other thing of, we might not know financially, but we know lots of other things, right? Like you're talking about therapists, right? Like they know lots of other things,
Mhm.
and we discount ourselves because we come and we have this lens of looking at like, well, I don't know my finances, but there's other things that you do know that you aren't, giving yourself credit for.
Yeah, and I will also add that, like, that shame and that guilt, of preventing you to ask questions is actually leaving you open for, exploitation. I would say
Mm,
that the majority of the financial, institution and world is built on that lack of education and that shame, because that's how they can sell products that you don't need. That's how they sell, tools that are not actually going to be worthwhile for you, but they are worthwhile for the person selling that said product. And so recognizing that is always key. And then like taking that next step. It's always about that next step of actually asking questions, whether it's asking questions for to a trusted friend or someone like me, but like finding some way to at least like get comfortable with the idea of asking the questions we don't need. I work with a lot of self-employed folks, and so therefore they are inherently intellectually curious. It tends
mm,
to be a
yeah,
trait that I come across.
yeah,
But even when it comes to finances, they may not be showing
yeah.
that. And I'm always it's part of the process is like let's get over that. Feel free, ask me any questions that you possibly can because that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. I always say, like, judgment and curiosity can't exist in the same space, right? And so when we have so much judgment around where we are, around our situation, around our finances, there's not room for curiosity. And so, like you said, even though most entrepreneurs are very curious, when we have such judgment about ourselves, about where we are, our financial position, lack of knowing, or whatever it might be, then there's not that room to be curious for that. I love what you said about the financial industry, because I feel like, and I'd be curious your thoughts, like it feels sometimes, and when I say financial industry, I mean uh, like bookkeeping and accounting and financial planning and estate planning and all of that kind of stuff, like very, and I think the world is, right, like very fear based, versus what are we moving toward, what do we want to create. And like you said, and I'd be if you're open to sharing, like if you're talking to people from that space of fear, or trying to sell things that maybe people don't need and you're not aware, um yeah, like what do you, I guess, suggest for clients, like when you're hiring a CFP, you're
Mhm.
looking for someone that you can trust and to guide you along this journey, like what are some of the questions or the advice that you give people when they're interviewing someone?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is like a huge debate in the CFP space, and we go back and forth as sort of like the proper business model
Mm,
of like what best serves clients, and like CFPs will like have endless debates about this. Meanwhile, like most people don't care. And the problem is like the people who should care are the people who are paying for the product.
yeah. Yep.
And so the reason I'm a fee only advisor, which is that term fee only, is because it's the only way that I, from my third party, when I was a journalist, would evaluate things and believe that I was getting true advice.
Yeah.
Because if it was someone getting commission or someone commission based, they could be selling insurance or talking about insurance when I was a journalist in a way that's really just benefiting them. And I
Yeah.
could never know for sure. So I would only interview fee only advisors. And so when I was making the switch, I was very adamant that I was going to be a fee only. There's a term called fiduciary. So
Mhm.
if you have a CFP, if you're talking to someone with the CFP letters, they have to
Yep.
be a fiduciary for you.
Yep.
But what
Yeah.
does that mean, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
like, if you're working for if you're talking to, let's say a brokerage CFP, well, they have products that they're selling, and
Yeah.
they have a mix of products that they can sell, and sure, it's within the best interest of you, but it's also best interest of them too, and
Yeah.
so it's like a combo. Whereas, I find that the fee only aspect is the only way to connect the business model to that term fiduciary.
Mm. Mm.
And so that's why I always say look for that if it's with me, even when people are like interviewing me, because often I'll encourage them to talk to one or two advisors outside of me as well.
Yep.
I'm always pushing them to a fee only sort of design. And then after that, it's really about what your needs are and what you want to get from the financial planning experience because like studies have done, and it's like 80% of people choose their financial planner based on how much they just connect with the person.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
a one-to-one thing. And
Yeah.
so you're gonna have to feel comfortable with that person.
Mhm.
And so if you're coming in because you have budgeting issues, is that person going to sit down and work with you through the budgeting issues? If you're coming in with a lot of assets and you need like a very large plan, does that person have the ability and understanding of that to manage that? So it's really sort of targeted at that point, and you really need to
Mhm.
understand what you want to get from the financial planning, and then ask specific questions to that to make sure that they are actually there to help. Basically, they're there for it. Whatever that sort of concern is. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it's fee only, from my understanding, it's like it's a flat fee, right? Probably for like an annual advice, I guess, for lack of a better word,
Mhm.
right? And then if someone has assets and they want to invest, do you make a plan and be like, okay, this is my suggestions for you, and then they go and self invest, or how does that work?
So I work with a lot of people who do that,
Okay.
where I'm teaching them how to invest, how to self-invest. Within the fee only model, we can also do that, AUM idea. We can invest for you, and there's reasons why. Like if you're older, you are facing aging risk. And that can come with a lot of uh, concern, fear, and the value of having a trusted advisor to manage your investments in such a case. That's worthwhile. My parents-in-law, father-in-law, works with an advisor in that realm because he has that concern and his wife has dementia, and so like we need to like be able to manage that correctly, and I don't want to do it for him.
Yeah.
And then the other reason is you just simply don't want to learn investing. Like that is a perfectly reasonable thing to
Yeah.
do, and but when doing that, you should make sure to get the other aspects of financial planning because investments is just a one small part of that entire financial plan, design and experience.
Yeah. Ryan said AUM. So just for those of you that may not know, because we talk the language, right? It's like assets under management is what he's talking about. And, I think that you said something about, if you don't care about investments, and this is what I have noticed with entrepreneurs too. And I mean, it's everyone, right? It's like the there's the I don't care about investments, like it doesn't like I don't like wake up thinking about it. And then there's like, I don't even want to be in any part of it. And I
Mhm,
think that there can be a very fine line of like, of abdication of responsibility of like, I don't care about my investments. I don't want to know. And we almost sometimes I notice this and tell me if you see this. It's like we put all of that responsibility on our advisor versus okay, I this isn't my most favorite thing, but I do want to know how is my money invested and
mhm.
how does it work? And really taking back that ownership and that responsibility and like working side by side with your advisor versus like, oh, my advisor does that and I don't know what's invested in it. He just does whatever and he calls me and you know,
Yeah.
that's the way it
There
works.
yeah, there's a term I like to use every once in a while, like, I'm here to educate you. I'm not
Yeah.
here to be your sin eater. So, like many, like
Mhm.
hundreds and hundreds of years ago, when someone would pass away, in order to like relieve the sins, like a wealthy person would essentially like put their sins into like a loaf of bread or whatever, and then someone would come in and they would pay this like poor person, frankly, to eat the bread
Mm.
and essentially
Mhm.
eat the sin. And
Mhm.
and this was supposed to get them, into above. And
Mhm.
uh and it was just a way to pass off responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like I am not here to just completely pass off responsibility because what I'm
Yep.
going to do is present with you to you options. And
Yep.
then within those options, you have to decide what's best for you because I'm not living your life. Um I always like to talk to people about the fact that like I drive a minivan. I do not care about cars at all. Like it does
Mhm.
not impact me. Like I just want to go from point A to point B. But I have clients that care a lot about cars. So okay, that's we need to know that and we need to create a budget around that. But I'm not here to then tell you you can't have a nice car if that's really what you want to do. It's just
Yep.
I'm here to tell you what's the impact of that sort of decision, and then where else in your life can you sort of shift things around in order to afford said thing. And so the more like you take an embrace of that and at least understand like the basic understanding of the concepts and the 101 type stuff and have
Yeah.
an advisor who will actually sit and explain this stuff to you,
Yeah.
um, the better off you'll be.
Yeah. I think 100%. I'm like, absolutely. Yes. um, and I think that this comes back to, because I'm always, yes, I play in the 3D of like, we want to know about our finances, but also what I call is the 5D, right? Like our emotions, right? With money and in our business. And I think that this comes back to when we abdicate responsibility, what I have noticed, it is we are trying to avoid a feeling because if the investment doesn't go the way that we want it to or we thought it should, right? Or that yeah, whatever it might be, it's like what feeling are we trying to avoid or not address by pushing off responsibility. And so if this is you, it's okay, right? Like I've done this before, right? And also that awareness and just noticing like where do I do this in my business and in my just personal life? And what feelings am I trying to, you know, not feel by saying, "Oh, the CPA's got it. Oh, my financial advisor has it." That kind of stuff or the bookkeeper or whatever it might be versus there is knowledge and there is power in knowledge and also like yeah like taking care of like your financial house, right?
Mhm.
um Beforehand we talked about like how to build protection for yourself, so like as an entrepreneur, do you want to dive into a little bit about how you view business and personal and just kind of give us your thoughts and share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when we are like building like a self-employed business in particular,
Yeah.
often, we get advice to sort of like, okay, you need the LLC, you need like QuickBooks or something to like track things, and oh,
Yep.
you got to separate the business and the personal or else. And that's all well and good for like legal reasons and liability reasons and whatnot. But it doesn't change the fact that like if you need, the example I always use is if you need a new roof and you can't access that money, you don't have that money in your personal account and you cannot access that money through your business, you're gonna feel a lot worse about your business in that case.
Mm.
And vice versa, if you're eating ramen every night, but you need to invest in the business to grow, where are you going to cut? You're going to feel a lot worse about the business because you're eating already doing what you can do. And so we really need to create balance between those two things and create security between both as a whole unit of
Yep.
the life of Aaron or life of Ryan. Like it's like the whole unit. And since work with a lot of service based self employed owners like private practice therapists, where their hour is spent for their hour of pay, they also create a system where they are basically create an income for themselves, but they haven't necessarily created a business for themselves. And so part of building security for them is figuring out what we're doing with their income. Are we investing in the markets? Are we investing in real estate? Or are we investing in that business to turn it into a business or other businesses or whatever? But we need to figure out sort of a plan for that. So it's not this, you know, 40 hours sitting in a seat listening to people's concerns, and we're reducing that, able to go on vacations, do live life the way we want to live as well.
Yeah, it's almost like if you're not aware, you can just trade your job for your business and
Yeah.
just be the employee. I know we're employees of our businesses, and also like you're working just like you were, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
at
Like it,
at 9 to 5.
I would say, within the service-based
Yeah,
self-employment world, I would
yeah.
say like that is like a rite of passage of realizing what you've done. like
Mm,
people start off thinking like this is how I want to live life and whatnot, but unless they've created parameters of like how much they need or how much they want, or decisions on sort of building a business, then they run into that concern of, well, this is just like an endless hamster wheel that I can't get off now because this is the way I make money and I have all these bills and I have to make the money and whatnot. So it becomes just like I call it hamster wheel syndrome, but yeah, it's essentially what it is.
yeah, I was gonna say, and also, what about burnout then, right? Like you're literally
Yeah.
just like, how much of it is actually sitting down and thinking about like what kind of life do I want to create? How many hours do I actually want to work? Um, how much money do I want to have?
Mhm.
And creating that versus it's almost like trading time for dollars, right? Like that's what it feels
Yeah.
like, sounds like.
In the private practice space, there's like, it varies year by year, but at any given time, about 50 to 60% of therapists um, state that are feeling the symptoms of burnout. Like
Mm,
it's the number, I mean, it's one of the top concerns for therapists. It's also why there's a large um, uh, flow of therapists that quit
mm,
because of burnout. And it's absolutely the end result of what, we're just kind of talking about is the fact that one, they may not be doing certain things like raising fees or something like that, or taking on too low of fees and whatnot. But then also they're not thinking about where they need to go, want to go, and should go based off whatever their goals are. And without that, like without the end in mind, it's really hard to plan for like now and what you
yeah,
want to do with the business and whatnot.
yeah. I always said it like it's like a checklist life, right? Like that's what I used to live. It's like just checking the boxes, but like how like is that the life that you actually want to live? I'm curious if like and I'm not familiar in terms of like therapist wise, but like is there opportunities for them to scale?
Yes. So there's a few different ways. One is building group practices. So, like, actually hiring other therapists and
Okay.
creating what a traditional like therapy practice might look like. But, I also have folks who would never want to hire people. Like they just have no interest in hiring people. So then we have to figure out outside of the business, okay, we're investing in like retirement and stuff like
Okay.
that. I call it like the the best passive income stream you could possibly build is that because there's also tax benefits to it. But then also, what else? What else can they do? Are they really and like, do they embrace risk? Is commercial real estate something that they want to do because they already have a space and now they can rent out other space? Or is there another way that they can use their experience and their expertise to build other lines of business, whether it's coaching or speaking or supervising or some other techniques? But there's, like
Yeah.
any profession, there's like 1,001 ways to make money. It's just you kind of have to figure out sort of what is the best way for you, your personality, and your
Yeah.
expertise.
Yeah. How do you here we go back to like how do you want to do it? And I think
Yeah.
this comes back to slowing down, right? Like do you notice with your clients, do you feel like a lot of them are in this like rushed place, like hurry up to get to either some number or some, they may not be saying this, but like some feeling, like they think the thing is going to bring them the feeling, which I mean, I'm like, as therapists, they probably are pretty aware. And also, it's like it happens like to the best of us, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and so like slowing down to actually ask yourself, what do you want? And I'm curious how many of them practice that, do you see?
Yeah, and that's a person by person sort
Yeah.
of situation. I will say that like the slowing down and thinking about what they want from, at least from a financial standpoint,
Yep.
um, that is part of what I do. I'm giving
Mm.
them specific time every quarter if we're doing like quarterly meetings where they actually have to think about this type of stuff. They're going to
Yeah.
be asked about this type of stuff. And then I'm going to give them action items to accomplish based on whatever they sort of decide. And, you know, I think everyone should have that in place. Like, even
Yeah.
if you're not working with an advisor, like, and you should have that time for yourself. But if you have a partner, also time with the partner to really think about sort of like where are you seeing life going, and like how do you want to get there, and how quickly do you want to get there? Because like I used to cover the fire movement, like financial
Mm.
independence, retire
Yeah.
early movement, right?
Yep.
And some of that stuff is so good in terms of like financial tactics, like you're saving more than you're spending and you're increasing your savings rate. But then the more you would talk to folks, they would get into like competitions about like
Yeah.
how quickly they're retiring or whatever,
Yep.
or how frugal they're being in their retirement. And like that's not the goal. Like that is not what we're doing personal finance for. And so uh we have to be careful of sort of like understanding the tactics and understanding why we're doing it, and then figuring out that time frame that works for us to do it. Um, and then in terms of like their personal like ability to slow down, some are really, really good at it. And then, they're just people just like us. Like they're
Yeah.
trained to think about this
Yep.
stuff, but some of them have taken on that personal growth very aggressively, and then some, less so, and probably will eventually do so. It's just, you know, and maybe they're not old enough yet, or maybe they haven't had time to, or whatever. So they just haven't done it, but they'll get there eventually.
Yeah. I always say, like, how do you feel in your body? Which
Mhm.
takes slowing down, which takes awareness. But like when you talk about the fire movement, like I wouldn't say that I was like, uh, uh, when I say not on board, like I for sure, like I was trying to retire at a certain age. And here we go back to like, how much are we not enjoying the present
Mhm.
to get to that future,
Yeah.
and it feels in my body, it felt terrible. It felt like I'm like almost killing myself to get to a place to be able to finally enjoy myself versus like, okay, how can we do both, right? Like, how can we enjoy our life now? How can we work and grow our business and also be planning for some time in the future? But, like you said, like with it's like we can sometimes almost take anything and just turn it into like not fun, rushed, you know, I don't want to say competition, but like, yeah, like how fast can we get there? And it's
Mhm.
like, here we go back to like, why are we trying to rush the process? What are we thinking that we're going to get, feeling wise from it versus slowing down and asking ourselves, like, how do I want to build my business? How do I want to grow? How do I want to have, you know, my life, personal life outside of my business? Like, what is the point? I mean, I talk to sometimes some owners and they're like, they hate their business. It's like, well, the whole point of having a business, right? Like,
Yeah.
is to be having fun, right? Like, yes, there's parts of our business that we may not, but you know what I mean? It's like, why aren't we enjoying ourselves now while we're growing and doing versus almost killing ourselves to get to where we think we want to go, you know?
Oh, yeah, like, when I was a self-employed journalist, like, I really struggled with the day to day, and I was taking
Mm,
on some of the stuff that fire movement was talking about because I really just wanted an escape. And it wasn't
mm,
until I found what I do now, where I truly love what I do, and the idea of like retiring or anything like that, it has I have no interest in it right now, and that's been a big shift because I really realized like what I actually wanted to do. And, like in fact, like the reason part of the reason I work with therapists is because I went through a long through therapy and it's helped me today. And a big part of that was figuring out what I wanted to actually do with my life. And so
yeah,
now that I'm actually doing that,
yeah,
it's a lot better, but that gets to the sort of the emotional side of it. And like, my goal isn't to retire in 10 years. My
yeah.
goal is to help my goal is literally to help a million people embrace and thrive in self-employment. That's what I
Mm,
want to achieve, and it has nothing to do with finances. It has nothing to do with like retirement. I need my finances in order to help achieve that, but I don't need to make $1 billion to help achieve that.
yeah. I wrote down like fantasize, right? Like that's exactly what I did, right?
Yeah.
Like when I get there, then I'll be able to finally. I mean, I was
Do
looking for
X. Yeah.
yeah, I was
Exactly.
looking for freedom and I was looking for joy. Like those were probably the two things. Like, oh, well, when we get to retire, then we get to, like yeah, and I think slowing down and it's like uh so many of us I think just like we come here to planet Earth to evolve and to grow and the human spirit likes to create, it likes to contribute, it likes to do those things. And so, why don't we just, instead of trying to work to save to then retire to go do the thing we love, like, why don't we just do the thing that we love and figure
Mhm.
out how to make money doing it, you know? Um, and
Yeah. Sorry.
no, it's just, it's like backwards, what we've been taught. And I think
Yeah.
that comes, go ahead.
Uh-huh. I was gonna say, I talked to someone just yesterday, a client of mine, and they kinda did kinda what you described. I mean, they are younger, pretty young. They've done an incredible job of saving, not spending, and not getting into debt, and they are, like, in the mid-30s. They're gonna be good. Like,
Yeah.
they're pretty good.
Yep.
And yet, when I asked him or the client, I was like, "Hey, what I'm seeing here is a lot of needs covered, but what do you want? Like, what do you want
Mm,
out of this money?" And it's not even something that he really had ever contemplated.
yeah.
And I flat out told him, I was like, listen, like you're doing a very good job here, but we need to figure out what you want out of this because this is not um like we're not here just to see this number rise as big as possible or on my financial planning software where it shows probability of success it says like
Yeah.
99%. We're not here just to get to 100% probability of success. Instead we're
Yeah.
trying to like get the stuff that we want out of life through this. And so what is that? And so I challenged him to like think about that because um it's the counter to the other side of the coin where someone's a spendthrift and going off and deep debt and whatnot, whereas this person has not done that but hasn't thought about the fun stuff in life and
Yeah.
really needs to think about that.
Yeah, that was for sure my work, and once I started kind of getting into coaching and learning about the brain and the body and all of that, like I was thinking about like neural pathways, like when we have been taught and brought up, and I think that this goes back to like depending on what your upbringing was like, and also like we're only I don't know how old you are, Ryan, but I'm 43, and like I'm one. my dad was raised by my grandpa was in the Great Depression, right? Like, so that generational trauma that I don't think necessarily and I think COVID is probably something else that, might circle back around. But like, if we aren't aware of like what our money stories are and what our money beliefs are, thinking about your client, because he sounds similar to me, it's like sometimes we are trying to have money provide that safety for us,
Mhm.
and what I had to teach myself was like safety is not an outside thing, right? Like it's an inside job. Like there will never be an amount of money that I will ever have or create that will make me feel safe inside. And here we go back to feelings and like, what are we willing to feel, right? Which, like, okay, I blow all my money or I use all my money or however it works, right? Like you have no money. It's like, what are you really afraid of? Like it was for me, it was like embarrassment or disappointment. And it was like sitting with those feelings because I was using money as a way to escape, to not have to feel those feelings. Um, you said something about, let me think about what you said. Oh, so like going back to neural pathways of like we've been taught to save, 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 save. So at what point do we get to like we don't just flip the switch and then now we're spending money, And I think that for a lot of people that are in that like saving and investing mentality, like it there is some delicate balance of like teaching ourselves, our bodies, that it's okay to spend money and have some fun now.
One of the more traumatic experiences in someone's life is when they decide to retire and
Mm.
all that portfolio that they've been building their entire life is now their income, and they have to go from saving to eventually spending. And it's part of the reason why that age group, the group that's about to retire, is so commonly coming to financial advisors, because one, they want assurance that they're okay,
Yeah.
but what the financial advisors have to do is then teach them how to spend,
Yeah.
because it's something that is very difficult for them to sort of, what you described, to sort of make that switch in their
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah.
I have a client who is extremely wealthy, has like exorbitant amounts of wealth, and this person needs to buy a house, and we're waging determining whether the person should get a mortgage or just paying cash. And I have told this person over and over and over again, you have way too much cash.
Yeah.
Just pay the thing in
Yeah.
cash and be done with
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
it's just, it never feels comfortable for the person.
Yeah.
So I don't know which way they're going to go with it.
Yeah.
But that's a feeling thing. That's not like a numbers thing. I've showed them
Yeah.
numbers,
Yep.
like that is like a complete feeling thing. And we like someone like me, I can't ignore the feelings, but I'm also not a therapist myself. And so
Yeah.
I can only talk to them about what they're thinking and show them the impact of said thoughts, either one. But I can't do the emotional work for
Yeah.
them. And,
Yep.
I have guided people to therapy in certain situations, because they need that sort of outlet, particularly when they're having trouble, like, they spend too much and they
Mm.
cannot get into that realm. But it's the same. It's just the opposite side of the coin again,
Yeah.
with that, and it's still an emotional sort of journey that someone needs to take.
Yeah, totally. Which comes, so I want to talk about like optimizing. Like, what are your thoughts on, like how we've been, I think a lot of us have been taught like we always have to be optimizing our money and we have to make sure that it's growing and we have to make sure it's like all of the things. Like, what's kind of your take on that? And like, what do you, visit with your clients about that in that regard?
Yeah, and there's a lot that my thoughts on that, because you'll and I blame stuff like CBS or CNBC
Yeah.
and stuff like that, where they're constantly hearing investing is like a win-loss game, and
Mm,
like what does this mean or what does that mean for their sort of long-term plans? And really, most of that stuff should have no impact on you whatsoever. And so you'll see someone with uh, a couple million to their name, putting like dreading putting, say, $10,000 into a treasury uh, bond, because they heard that like the rates are really high, and should they or shouldn't they, and really like sweating over this. And meanwhile, it's like less than 0.01% of their net worth and will have no impact whatsoever. And
Yeah.
is that really worth your time? Like, is
Yep.
that really how you want to spend your time right now? Some people think they do, but in reality, it's kind of how we're taught finances because we're not really taught the tactics. We're only taught that it's kind of a win loss game. And
Mm,
that's because we're only taught through um, what we see in like popular culture and like CNBC and places and like Wall Street Journal and stuff like that. And so it becomes this win loss game. And if I'm not doing something, I'm losing in some way.
mm,
When in fact, so much of what we're doing we're not like trying to optimize so you can have the highest possible penny at the end of your life. Instead, we want to know like it goes back to what are your goals and are you reaching them? Because like that's my concern. My concern isn't so much like, obviously if someone comes to me with a question about a treasury investment, I'm gonna explain to them the value of it and
yeah.
the problem of it. But like when I'm creating a financial plan for someone, I'm not looking at saying, well, this is the investment design that is going to be the ultimate design for you. Instead, we're trying to figure out how much risk you need to take on to achieve the goals that you have in your life.
Yeah. I always I always go back to like energy and emotion, right? Like you're talking about the one client that's like, do I do I pay cash or do I, and we can be in this like there is no right or wrong, right? It's just like how does it feel in your body? What do you want to do? And then moving forward and then having your own back, right? Like through the through the process. And I know that you're saying, I don't do the emotions, but like that is what I think is that is the part that I think that helping my clients and just like, yeah, spreading the word of like, money is an emotional thing and we want to get it to a point of like neutrality, right? Like, which takes time and all of that. But like, it's so much of how much energy are we spending with this decision versus it's okay, you get to redecide. It's okay to make, like I think a lot of us too grew up like it's not okay to make mistakes or,
Mhm.
you make mistakes, it costs money. Like there's so many stories and underlying beliefs that we have around that like has us in this like seesaw effect versus supporting ourselves, asking ourselves like what do we want and making decisions from that place from a versus there's a right like you're saying like what the culture is like there's a right or a wrong or a win and a lose and very black and white mentality versus like it's both and.
Mhm, and it kinda speaks to perfectionism, which also
Yes.
evades this the space, um,
Yep.
and yeah, when I say I don't, like, deal with the emotions, like, I'm there for the emotional sort of
Yeah.
discussions, I just
Yeah.
can't work through those
Yes.
emotions with the person
Yeah.
because I don't have the skill set to do so, but,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they, that perfectionism, it's really hard to break through, and it's not something I think that, one, comes naturally to most people, but also one that you're necessarily just because you're told that that's happening, that you're necessarily gonna see. It's more of a slow recognition that
Yep.
happens over time. Um, Eventually, like, maybe it's that
Yeah.
burnout aspect. It's like you eventually burn out, and then you're sort of like, "Okay, what's actually important here?"
Yeah.
But the less you can avoid that, the better, 'cause, no one wants to burn out, so
Yeah. I think it's like anything, right? It's like when, the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And sometimes we aren't ready for the message or, the lesson. And
mhm.
that's okay, right? Like, but I agree with you. Like, it does take time. It isn't like this light bulb moment and then we just flip a switch, right? So, is there anything else that we haven't discussed or that I haven't thought about to ask you that you see or, yeah, anything else you want to share?
I mean, I think we've had, like, a great discussion, obviously, between, like, the emotions and whatnot. I would say that just, like, in general, we like, going back to that personal really focus on where you are now in your life, and the things that you need to get out of life to make you more happy, content, whatever, and if you start there, then you'll know where to find that next, like, piece of advice or next step or whatnot because, um this like personal finance is not solved in a day. It's
Yeah.
like it's continuously small steps done continuously. And And that's really what it is. And over a lifetime, that's how you build wealth. And so just really focus on that next step.
I love that because I always say like we here we go back to fantasizing, you know, when we were talking about the fire movement and things like that. Like I always say
Mhm.
like celebrate the 1%, right? Like 1% ultimately gets you to where you want to go. It's not sexy. It's not what everybody talks about, you know, in social
Yeah.
media or on the news or whatever, right? But like how do like Millionaire Next Door or like those books like that, like how do people build wealth? How do people build a business one single step at a time, right? And the honest answer is like you don't know step 10, right? You just know next step. That's really what we know, right?
Yeah.
And celebrating ourselves and getting in the habit of celebrating. I don't think a lot of us, I'd be curious if your clients are probably following this this part too of like we don't celebrate ourselves enough. Like we withhold that the celebration, the atta girls, atta boys for like when we get to that place and it feels so restrictive and it's like we have to earn that versus like how are you better than you were yesterday? How have you evolved from yesterday? How have you, you know, just really it does take some effort to change like to constantly be looking at like what have you done versus how far you have to come, you know, or
Mhm.
have to go, I should say. But yeah, celebrating that 1% and like really of like where am I right now and like where am I going and loving the process, you know.
Absolutely. Like, when my, wife we were paying back her student loan debt, like, every 10,000, we would do something. Like, it would be
Yeah.
small, but, like,
Yeah.
do something to, like, celebrate just because, like, it was a lot, and we weren't gonna get there unless we celebrated along the way, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. Do you have anything in terms of like where can people find you, yeah, connect with you, learn more about you, all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I work for United Financial Planning Group. It's kind of the umbrella I work under,
Okay.
but I actually market through thinkingcapfinancial.com, and I have an ebook there. It's free. You can download it at thinkingcapfinancial.com/income to wealth. I'll send it to you so you can put it in the
Okay.
show notes. And
Yeah.
it's really about how you can take self-employment or private practice income, solo income, and turn that into long-term protection and wealth for yourself.
Mm. I love that. Okay, we'll put all of Ryan's information in the show notes. And I want to thank you again for sharing your time, your knowledge. I appreciate it, Ryan.
Yep, thanks again.